Hey everybody, it's Erin Carey, and I am sitting down with Dr. Alina Olteanu of Whole Child, Texas. And both of us were talking recently about this epidemic of kids' anxiety that's happening. And I know that this is something that Dr. Olteanu sees up close and personal. I'm a parent, I see this as well in my own children. And so I am really excited to just kind of pick your brain and hear a little bit about what you're seeing, what you think is going on, and how we as parents can help, or caregivers, teachers, whatever it is, how we can help these kids that are undergoing so much right now.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this because in my practice these days, this is a hot topic. I've never seen so many kids with anxiety and anxiety related conditions before. Even before the pandemic, I've seen an increased number of children with anxiety. But now, a year after the beginning of the pandemic, the number of children that I'm seeing on a daily basis and the severity of their conditions is really concerning. So I want to share with parents things that they can do to help children get back to their happy selves. Because the good news is this is reversible. This doesn't have to become a lifelong conditions, but my concern is that a lot of children, if left untreated, or if this is going on for too long, they can grow into adults who struggle with anxiety for many years. And one thing that I do want to educate parents on is that anxiety doesn't necessarily have to be treated with medications. There's so many things that we can do in terms of lifestyle and nutrition and supplements that can help children, as I said, get back to their happy selves. Because children should be happy. They should be carefree. They should not live in fear, and they should be able to be creative, learn, sleep well. And a lot of children with anxiety can't do these things. One thing I also want to make parents aware of is that many children, especially younger children, cannot verbalize anxiety. They're not going to mom and dad and say, oh, I can't sleep because I have anxiety, or I don't want to go to school because I have anxiety, or I don't want to go out because I have anxiety. They act it out through their bodies, either in a certain behavior or physically. They can have chronic symptoms like chronic abdominal pain. They can develop constipation or digestive issues like bloating, poor appetite. A lot of my younger kids, but older kids with anxiety are very picky eaters. They can develop all kinds of eating disorders, not necessarily anorexia or bulimia, but just being really picky and not wanting to eat healthier foods. They have sleep difficulties. Either they sleep too much or they sleep too little. They have chronic headaches. And then some kids are just really grumpy all the time. They are very irritable. You can't ask them anything and they're exploding, or they're very withdrawn. They refuse to go back to school, especially some kids got very fearful during the pandemic, and they want to continue online school, although the face-to-face school option is presented to them. Um, so these are things that parents can look for and think about, that this is a child, this is not a difficult child, or but this is a child that has been exposed to a lot of stress and now exhibits different symptoms of anxiety.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mention just the different levels of mood changing, because I think some of that as parents, it's like we know our own kids, but we also have our own stress, and we have a lot going on. And so sometimes it's hard to pick up on those little changes, or we think, oh, well, she's
Mhm.
13, he's 15. Like this is just part of growing into adolescence,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, when is it what are you seeing parents picking up on, or those small changes where they know, okay, this is really an issue, or are you catching things that parents aren't catching?
Yeah, so some kids only present with physical symptoms like headaches or rashes. I've seen several kids with really bad rashes or worsening eczema because they're very anxious. Constipation, chronic constipation, and chronic abdominal pain. And some kids are very quiet and withdrawn, so it's harder to pick up that this is actually an anxious kid, but they're more internalizing their feelings, and then they have physical symptoms that that are going on for a long time. So we have to look at is this possible anxiety? Other kids are more irritable. And as you said, sometimes it's hard to tease out, especially for adolescents or pre-puberty kids. But if it's becoming like something consistent or interferes with the family life, or their grades are dropping, then it's something to consider to talk with a pediatrician and see if there's something else that it's a little bit more concerning that's going on, and it's not just some hormonal
Right.
puberty mood swings. Um, Really severe sleep issues, like a child that just can't go to sleep, or younger children, they can go to sleep by themselves. That's also something to consider, that maybe it's a child that's becoming more anxious.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And and you mentioned the physical, like eczema and what was rashes, all those. I mean, those are also gut things, right? And that could be the
Mhm.
whole
Yeah.
gut brain highway talking and communicating. Well, and I know that's true for myself. There, sometimes my body will tell me what my brain doesn't yet want to realize. And so
Yeah.
I think that's for sure the case for our kids. And I'm glad that you recognize that, because I think a lot of us would be like, well, they're constipated. I guess I just got to give them Miralax or whatever,
Mhm.
right? But that's not really so. I mean, we got to address all of those other issues as
Mhm.
well. And so, what do you recommend? I mean, I have an idea, and I hope that you say what I think you're going to say. But especially if we're talking about something that would help with constipation and help
Mhm.
maybe relieve some of this mental anxiety, what's your number one for that?
Yes. So what a lot of my kids with anxiety are laughing when I ask them how they're pooping. But I've seen so many kids with anxiety, and as you mentioned, I know there's that gut brain immune system connection, that a lot of children who have any kind of mood behavior disorder, especially anxiety, high stress, they do have some gut issues that most of the time looks like constipation. Um, so I work a lot with lifestyle in general, and that includes nutrition, nutritional supplements, but also stress management for the entire family. Because a child that's anxious, it's usually it's not the only person in the family that's anxious. We have to look at the parents, and I I explain to parents that a child is never born or raised in a vacuum. It's raised in a family that has not just the same genetic background, but the same emotional background, and the way parents interact with their children and children with their parents. They affect each other's neurochemistry and each other's moods. So I can't just treat the parent, or sorry, I can't just treat the child for anxiety. The parents have to manage their own stress, and many times parents struggle with anxiety, depression, really high stress. And almost everyone I know has been through high stress in the last year. um, but just because the parent has, for example, a financial stress or a job stress, and he or she thinks that the children don't know about it, doesn't mean the children don't pick up on that stress and neurochemistry in ways that it's really impossible to hide from them. even if we don't talk about it, just the way we behave, the way we our tone of voice, our facial expression. Kids always monitor us and scan us all the time, and they know when mom and dad are stressed. Um, so I sometimes surprise parents when a child is anxious and constipated, for example, when I talk about parental stress, because they don't always see that connection. And I'm not saying that all constipated kids have stressed parents, but sometimes there is a connection. So parental stress management, and it's really, really important for a child's mental health. And I can't treat just the child without addressing the parent's mental health and stress level as well. So in terms of nutrition, first thing I tell parents is to eliminate all processed food and sugar, because added preservatives, artificial dyes, added sugars, they all can make anxiety and any kind of mental health, behavior health issues worse. So as we're eliminating the foods that are not conducive to mental health, we have to add things like vegetables and protein and healthy fats, fermented foods for gut health, lots of fibers. um, I can't improve a child's mental health without changing the diet. And until it's hard to make changes, it's hard for adults, so it's hard for kids too. So I give them time. I'm not expecting a child who doesn't like vegetables to eat 5, 8 servings of vegetables per day the next day they see me. So I give them time to make these changes. And in the meantime, I suggest a multivitamin, magnesium supplement, fish oil, omega-3 is one of my favorite supplement for any kind of mental health, behavior health issues. There are a couple of other ones, but I start with the basics: magnesium, omega-3, multivitamin, a good multivitamin that has B12 and folate. And then there are other ones, as I said, inositol, GABA, L-theanine. All these are good nutritional supports for kids who struggle with anxiety. Also probiotics, so addressing gut health. You would not maybe think that a child with anxiety should be on probiotics, but it's really so important to address their gut microbiome. That I have a lot of my children with anxiety on probiotics, sometimes digestive enzymes, if they really struggle with digestive issues. And then sleep. A lot of kids don't sleep enough, or they don't sleep well, especially teenagers. So we can't treat anxiety without getting a good night's sleep. And then playing outside in a safe way, but kids need to breathe fresh air and they need to be physically active. I think our bodies cannot, our minds, brains cannot feel good if we don't move.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And so much of this, I really benefit myself from taking GABA. That is one of my absolute favorites, especially during certain times of the month. I feel like it's very helpful for me. But some of these things, they are safe for kids to use as well, right? Like there are, and because I know at your office you have
Mhm.
a section for like L-theanine. And what's the youngest age? Say a
Mhm.
child is struggling with sleep,
Mhm.
and maybe a parent has tried magnesium, or maybe they haven't.
Mhm.
At what age could they add something like L-theanine or GABA, something like that?
So I usually try with sleep. Sleep is such a complex and it's a complex issue. So I try a lot of sleep, especially with younger kids, but adolescents too. So I try sleep hygiene, limiting screen time, which is huge. It's a topic in itself. um, but I try magnesium, melatonin first, lifestyle change it, like turning off the screen. And then I introduce GABA, L-theanine, usually pre-puberty, like 11, 12 years and older. I think in my experience, a lot of the younger kids, they do really, really well with just good sleep hygiene and magnesium, melatonin. Also chamomile, like herbs, chamomile, passion flower. So for the younger kids, I try to do more herbs. There are kids who, especially special needs kids, kids with autism, they may need prescription medication for sleep, but many of them, they do really well with the ones that I mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, magnesium. It's funny. I know I've heard it being referred to as nature's
Yeah,
Xanax before.
I like
um,
that.
Yeah, and I will say my youngest child, I think we introduced it. He was probably, I mean, both of my boys have very active, like just active brains. It's very, that's how I'm going to put it. And at night, those brains are still active. And magnesium was a really big deal for my youngest when he was, I mean, he was under
Mhm,
2. He was probably 15 months
mhm.
old. It was the first time he had ever slept through the night. So yeah, so it's something that I'm actually, I'm thinking about. I'm actually out of habit with that right now, and I probably need to add that back in for him. But anyway, and that also helps with the
Yes,
constipation,
yes,
right? Like that's going to
yeah.
help
So yeah,
make that run more smoothly as well, which is
yes,
important.
magnesium is one of my favorite supplements, and a lot of kids are depleted because they don't eat enough vegetables, and vegetables are not grown in a soil that is rich in magnesium. But in general, I would say more than half of my kids just don't eat enough vegetables. Kids prefer fruits, but they don't do well with fruit, vegetables and salads. And ideally, the ideal recommendations are 8 to 10 servings, which I don't think I have anyone that does that. Maybe some do, but if they do 5 servings per day, I'm happy. Most kids are doing 2 or 3.
At that,
If
if even
if
that, and
even
that might,
that, yes, on a daily basis. Um,
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, that's really good. And and I will say, even for just another side note for my own family, I recently had to cut out gluten because I knew
mhm,
that my stress loads were, and we haven't talked about gluten yet, which I can ask you about that in a minute, but I knew for me, my stress loads were high. That's an easy thing that I can do that's going to kind of eliminate that brain fog a little bit.
mhm,
And I quit it cold turkey. And I thought, well, gosh, if this makes such a difference for me, why don't I do that with one of my kids? Well,
mhm.
I guess we're kind of, if you do it with one, you got to do it
Yes,
with all of them
yeah.
because you just
Yeah.
don't have gluten in the house. But yeah, but I definitely, specifically one child that I knew needed some extra support. And I will say within about just 5 days, I could already notice a difference in decreased emotional outbursts. That's something that when my kids are, I mean, my kids,
Mhm,
of course, they're kids. And so they're always going to be big emotions and feelings and things, which is
mhm.
great. But when it's happening a little bit more than usual, when they're feeling a little bit more triggered, which as adults, we do that too. We
Yes,
just know how to tone it down.
yeah,
We
yeah.
just stuff it all inside and
Mhm,
suffer for it later. But kids, everything is out here. And so when my kids are doing that more than usual, I'm like, okay, what is going on in their little brains? It's causing them to
mhm,
be dysregulated. And I do think for a lot of people, gluten is a trigger, can be a trigger that's, and it can trigger leaky gut as well, but it's something that can be easily reduced or
mhm.
eliminated completely, and you can still enjoy food. Now, there are a lot of processed foods that are gluten
Yes,
free. I mean, I think Fritos are gluten free or
yeah,
Cheetos or something, right?
yeah,
So I'm not saying, again,
yeah.
we want to eliminate or reduce the
Mhm.
processed foods in general, but just that in itself makes such a difference. And I know a lot of people, there are a lot of debates about that. Is gluten okay? Is it the pesticide? Is it the gliadin? Like
Mhm.
people will debate if it's okay or not. And I think we should be able to tolerate some, but the amount of wheat and gluten that kids consume, especially in their daily diet, it's in everything. And I think sometimes that can just be a little overload, a little too much.
Yes. And I think that's the key, Erin, that most kids are tolerating gluten and even dairy.
Yeah.
You probably know that I'm not necessarily pushing cow milk, and definitely educating parents that not everybody needs cow milk, but I'll get back to that. But on gluten, most kids tolerate some, like the same with most adults tolerate. But when you start seeing any kind of behavior outbursts, digestive issues, rashes, chronic allergies, you do have to think about gluten sensitivity, which is a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So it's not celiac disease. It's not a full-blown gluten allergy, but a lot of people make antibodies to gluten, which can cause leaky gut, and then other chronic issues, including behavior outbursts, sleep difficulties. I try not to put everyone on a gluten-free diet, and I try to test first. But it's, as you said, it's okay to do gluten-free trial for a couple of days, a couple of weeks. I think for 2-3 weeks at the time, it's safe to do it. The reason I'm not putting everyone without testing is because I don't want to limit kids' diet. But as you said, at the same time, I educate a lot. I do agree with you that kids eat a lot of gluten, a lot of grain. That's kind of their staple diet, and they're not eating enough fiber, enough vegetables, fruits, protein. So I do believe in gluten sensitivity, and that it can cause a lot of chronic conditions, anything from migraines to rashes to behavior outbursts.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't realize, even for me, that I had a sensitivity, but I was having some skin issues and thought, okay, let's start taking some things away and see what happens. And that turned out to be something that's been helpful. So, it's just, it is trial and error for adults, but for our kids, we really, and I want to say, to your point, like, I want to make sure anybody who's listening that we are adding a variety of foods, because we want our kids to like food and to not be like, oh, I can't have that. I can't have that. Like, that's not really helpful for stress either, and anxiety. Yeah. And so trying to increase by doing a variety, or maybe we're going to have pasta. Maybe you do chickpea pasta. I love chickpea or lentil pasta, because then you have, it's a different type. I mean, it might be processed to an extent, but it's still, you're getting there's more protein in it, you're getting all of the other nourishing things that are there instead of just the grain. And so that might, or trying kids on quinoa, which I keep trying, it's not working. Like, oh, I don't like this. But just trying to add a variety and be open instead of doing the same old thing over and over again, because I know for me how my body responds to that, and I've got to change things up pretty frequently. And so I think that's true for our kids as well, especially as they're growing and developing and their brains are developing and all of that.
Yes. And it may be a little bit harder for some parents because the entire family has to be on the same diet. They have to eat, the parents have to eat the same thing. So it's not just for kids. And kids learn by mimicking. So if you don't have pasta every night or pizza every night or Chick-fil-A every night, I'm not saying anything wrong with Chick-fil-A once in a while, but it's better to cook at home as much as possible, to eat whole foods, and not eat foods that great grandma wouldn't recognize.
I like that. That's a good way to measure it. Would my great grandma recognize this as food?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, this is so helpful. Is there anything else you would add as parents or?
Yeah, so one of my main concern in the last, I would say at least 6 months, it's been excessive screen time. And all my recommendations went out the window with the online learning, because I used to say kids should be 1 or 2 hours a day, and then they end up being like 6, 7, 8 hours for school, and then they do at the recreational screen time. So now that more kids are going back to school, and hopefully everyone is going to go back to school and soon, limit as much as possible screen time, especially if it's not school related. And if it's recreational, limit it to fun TV, like movies, and not this fast-paced, adrenaline provoking video games. And because I'm seeing kids who are truly addictive to their electronics, and a lot of parents recognize it, because when they try to take their phones or iPads or Xbox or computer away, kids are throwing an unbelievable fit, and crying fits and screaming for hours. So slowly, I do have to admit that I don't have the perfect solution, but again, wean them off slowly. And as we're taking things away from kids, we have to replace them. So other activities, family time, parents limit their own use of phones and electronics. So modeling behaviors and introducing activities that do not include a screen. The other thing is, we all are social animals. We need to be among other people, especially kids. So now that things are improving, at least a little bit, I think kids need to socialize. They need to play with each other. They need to see other kids, other people. I think a big part of this horrible anxiety pandemic is isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a fear of getting sick. There's a fear
Mhm.
of germs. There's a fear, you know, kids are washing their hands, or they're afraid to touch things, or they're, I mean, that's changing. That's new. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of that before, but this has kind of heightened
Mhm.
that anxiety as well.
Yeah, so if parents can limit kids' access to media and news, and not talk about this topic all the time, or if we do talk about it, talk it in a more neutral and not anxiety provoking way, and educate kids in general about germs, but also about our immune system. And as part of that conversation, talk about all the lifestyle changes. So we're not doing this just because parents are being difficult, but we're doing this because it does improve the kids' immune system, and it protects them against germs. So children need to see both sides and understand both sides of the story.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. This has been such a good conversation, and I'm glad we got to talk. And so make sure you guys follow Dr. Alina Olteanu at Whole Child Texas. You can go to Whole Child Texas on Facebook, or to the website wholechildtexas.com, and then on Instagram you're at Dr. Alina O. Correct?
Dr. Alina Olteanu.
Oh,
Just
it's the full name. I don't
yeah.
know why yes. Okay. So we will
Okay.
definitely, but I think searching Whole Child Texas should pop up on
Yes.
Instagram as
Mhm.
well, because I know you're giving out good information about what's going around, or how, what you're
Yeah.
seeing at your office. And I think that that's all really helpful to be aware of. So thank you. This was a fun conversation, and I hope that it was helpful to somebody.
Thank you, Erin. Bye, everyone.